G'day everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. I hope you have had a great weekend. It's currently raining where I am. We've got some funny weather happening all over our country at the moment. It's raining here in Brisbane, down in the south corner of Australia. I don't think as far as Linda down in Hobart, though Linda can tell us in the chat what her weather's like. But down south, we're having record heat for autumn. And of course, here in Australia, we're heading into our colder months. We're in the southern hemisphere. And so, yeah, it's funny. So if you hear a kind of sound over my mic, you'll understand why, because I've got rain going on. A happy Mother's Day to all of our friends in the UK. I believe it's Mother's Day, still Mother's Day, because it's the 10th of March where you are in the UK. So happy Mother's Day to those in the UK. A big shout out to everyone in the US and Canada on what is, I think it's celebrating Napping Day. Now, if this is not right, I'm going to throw Linda under the bus for this one, because I had never heard of Napping Day, and today in our usual Monday email, she let me know that it was, is it international? Linda, is it International Napping Day? National? I don't know. So I was having a bit of a jest with Linda earlier about her needing to take a nap on her public holiday. Currently, isn't Linda amazing? She joins us on public holidays. It's currently what's called 8-hour day in Tasmania, which is what is typically referred to here in Australia as Labor Day, but as usual, the Tasmanians have to go and do things differently. It's Labor Day down in, or 8-hour day in Tasmania, and I think it's Labor Day currently in Melbourne, and maybe in New South Wales. I don't know. Anyway, if you're having a public holiday and you're still joining us, thanks for tuning in, and a big hello to everyone who chimes in for the show as a replay, which the majority of you do. It's always good to have you join in and get so much out of the program, as you all let me know, which is great. And hey, if you do get something out of today's video, please hit the thumbs up button. You know, encourage me and tell the algorithm how much you enjoy the show. Today we are going to be doing a Q&A, so now is the time. Throw your questions in to the live chat. Linda grabs them, she puts them into a Google Doc for me, which I can see over here, and I'm able to then do my humble best to answer your questions. And for the most part, we're able to do that. So that's what we're about to do in a moment. So start throwing your questions in. Of course, we answer those questions in chronological order. That is, as they come in. But if you absolutely want to jump the queue, if you want a bit of a VIP treatment, throw in a super chat. You can add some dollars to your question, and we'll make sure we prioritize your question. You get to jump the queue and definitely have your question answered today. And all of those proceeds go back into the running of the show, which is really helpful. Next week we are doing a mini topic. Before we talk about next week, let's just really appreciate last week we had our second special guest on the show, and it was such an encouraging show. I found my chat with Nancy just really encouraging. She really talked to the development of confidence, and if that's something that you're wanting to develop in and you didn't grab last week's show, please jump across and have a watch, because I think I think you'll be really encouraged by it. Next week's show, we're doing a mini topic, and we're going to be talking about the developing of your unique voice. And so I've got some thoughts that I think you'll find helpful. We'll go through them and talk to some key points, the things that I think you can really take on board practically and implement, so that you aren't just simply emulating what you hear on the radio. It's really interesting how when I have a younger student come in and sing for the first time, and these are typically young people who have not had singing lessons, how there is this emulation of the vocal zeitgeist, if you will, and that is that, you know, you can hear the sounds of a Billie Eilish and so many other sort of Taylor Swift kind of vocals built into, because that's what they're listening to, you know. And if you go to a generation older, you'll hear more Coldplay and those sorts of sounds, and you go, do you know what I mean? We tend to find ourselves vocally gravitating to the age that we live in, or that we are growing up in, and that tends to happen during our younger years. But I think there's something that we can do to really, there are many things that we can do to develop our own unique sound, so that we're not just an emulation of our era. And so we're going to talk about that next week. So make sure you subscribe, hit the white bell icon. That way you can not miss next week's show. The week after that, so in 2 weeks' time, it'll be our last one for this quarter. Then we take a 1 week break, because the week after 2 weeks is Easter Monday, which is a public holiday here in Australia. So on the 25th of March, Australian Eastern Standard Time, we do these live hangouts every Monday at 1 p.m. We have my very good friend Sharon Tree joining us again on the show, and we are going to be talking to the great myths of singing. And there are so many. There are just so many wives' tales and myths and misunderstandings. Some of them have been brought about through misinformation. You know, people who I think aren't seeking to create misinformation, but, you know, just by virtue of Chinese whispers, which is what we used to call that game where you would give a sentence or a group of words, and then you have to hand it along the line until the end of the line, after they've been passed through about 5 or 6 different people. It doesn't represent what was said in the initial point. And I think that can happen a bit with the world of singing information. And so Sharon is going to join me in 2 weeks' time to talk about that, and I think it'll be a great show, because she's actually got this series that she's been doing on Facebook, sort of like a meme series, if you will, about the myths around singing. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and we're all going to learn something, I think, and it'll be interesting. And maybe you can front up to that show and tell us about your the myths that you have learnt are not all they're cracked up to be. So we're going to jump into some questions. I can see a question coming in here, but we are going to jump to that question right after this. Okay, so let me just find this question. This is the start of the question. I'm just going to grab it here. So this is a question from Fly Me to the Bass. Fly Me to the Bass? The bass? Fly? That's an interesting... Why not bass as in B-A-S-S? I don't know. Fly Me, maybe you can let us know. What do you think about the term... It's actually mixed voice. It should say mixed voice, I think, not missed voice. Mixed voice. It's a problematic term, Fly Me. It's problematic because it leads us to think that there's almost like an extra register, and there is not. Registration is a rather confusing concept around singing, and when I say it's confusing, it's because there is a number of different models of registration that in and of themselves are all rather, in one sense, accurate, and that is that there's nothing wrong with those models, but everyone applies the models slightly differently, and so it does give rise to this confusion around the terminology. And so when we talk about voice registration, we're often most people online, you'll hear them use the terms head voice and chest voice denoting those lower notes, and head voice denoting those higher notes. And then it's often when using those two sort of polarizations, if you will, high and low, that we then find ourselves needing to use another term to describe kind of what happens in the middle between the two. And that's where this idea of mixed voice came about. The reality of good singing is that actually everything about what you do with the voice is a mix. Another way you could think about it is everything you do with your voice is about a muscular weighting, and where you go heavy to light. And in fact, that was another way of describing it, light mechanism and heavy mechanism. In the early 2000s, a big model, and this is still the model I tend to find myself using, is the Thurman and Welch model, which is what's referred to as shortener dominant, that is thyroarytenoid, TA muscle, shortener dominant, and lengthener dominant, which is cricothyroid, CT musculature. And they're in this sort of tug of war, and depending on who's winning the tug of war between those two muscles kind of determines what kind of weighting you get. And then in 2009, a new model came out where we refer to it as mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 being that chesty sound, that shortener dominant sound, and mode 2 being that lengthener dominant head voice sound. And so you can go, well, gee, this is all just, terminology. And on one level it is. But what these new models seek to do is to clarify, this information so that we don't have that confusion around things like mix voice. So back to your question, Flyme, what is my what do I think about the term? Look, it's a term I do tend to use. I tend to use it mostly here in the studio when I'm teaching, because I've got the opportunity to clarify and define what mix voice is, and that is simply a middle of the road weighting where it's neither heavy nor light. It's kind of the Goldilocks zone of just right, and we get that balance of the musculature that gives us a really good full tone, but it's not, so heavy that you'd call it chest or so light that you'd call it head. And so I think the terminology, the term, if we can always define what it means, has a place, but it is important that we apply the use of the term understanding what is registration, and how do we how do we use that knowledge in the application of our singing. So I hope that's helpful. There is a follow-up question that you put here, which I just saw. I always think vocal cord closure when mixed voice comes to the table. That's interesting. It is, regardless of where you are in your range, you will have vocal fold closure, because the voice has to balance. And, to phonate, you're going to have closure. But how much closure and whether it's a long phase closure as opposed to a short phase, and we can get really technical with it. But certainly mixed voice is typically referring to something in registration. And we've got Kelly has thrown in a super chat. Kelly, thank you. Kelly's a bit of a... Kelly's regularly throwing in super chats. Kelly, I just thank you, and a shout out to you for doing so. It's very much appreciated. So we're going to go straight to Kelly's question. And I've just seen, as I'm looking for your question, Kelly, I've just seen that you missed Nancy. Kelly, I highly recommend you go and check that video out after today's live hangout. You're wondering about microphones, and I'm wondering where. I'm trying to find where the question is. Hang on a second. I'm gonna. Here we go. I found it. Let's go. So Kelly is asking, oh, where did you go? Oh, don't do that to me, Wirecast. I'll find it again, Kelly. It's okay. I promise. I don't know why. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's because that one, I've got to turn that off, I think. There we go. I'm using a new version of the program I used to stream with, and it's got a few little fiddly things that I was not aware of. Here we go. I wonder about microphones. Do you recommend practicing with them and headphones so you can hear yourself more accurately, or is this other way round? Okay, interesting question. I love this question. So with working with microphones, and Kelly, this will ring true for you because we've had private lessons together. When I'm working on technique, I always have students working off microphone, that is without a microphone, and with no headphones. And there's a reason for that. Firstly, I want you to work with and develop your acoustic sound. I want you to do that without amplification, and I want you to do that without headphones, because I want you to work with the room resonance, the acoustic value of the room, as well as the bone conduction of your system, because as we know, we hear ourselves quite uniquely because it's the combination of those things for us as the producer of the sound. And so I don't want us to have headphones on when we're doing that, because what we tend to do is really mute out that acoustic value of the room, and it changes the resonant value of your voice and the way you're able to read it and what's going on. When it then comes to working on a song, I always, in studio, this is not always possible when I'm working with students online, but I do like to have students on microphone in their lessons here in studio. Why? Because I want them to get used to hearing themselves through the fold back on a song, and get used to and comfortable with working with the microphone and be able to develop their voice that way. And so we're really getting the best of both worlds there, off mic for technical exercises, and on mic for working with the songs. As far as then working with headphones, as I've said with the technical work, I do not like to be on headphones. And in fact, when an online student joins in for the first time, they often do start the Zoom session with the headphones on, and we will then work our way through, to taking the headphones off for the reasons I've just highlighted. What I like to do, though, is on occasion, because there are occasions where a professional singer, a vocational singer for that matter, may find themselves having to sing with headphones on. The perfect example of that is when recording in a studio, or even in their own, bedroom with their little PA mix-up setup, and they're wanting to develop a recording, we often have to sing and record with headphones on to make sure that we're isolating any sound and not getting any sound bleed into the microphone from the track that they're singing to. So there is value with practicing to the songs with headphones on. That being said, for the majority of the time, I still have, my students practicing without headphones. The other, and I'll throw this in as a sort of almost like a third idea, is for many people who are gigging, they're working with in-ear monitors. And so it can be of value to practice, because in-ear monitors are going to be different to over-the-ear headphones. In-ear monitors are going to sit right in the ear. They often block out everything about the room, and there is a skill to learn in becoming used to just hearing yourself through an in-ear monitor. Many people who start working with IEMs, will often report, it's so weird, I feel so isolated, and it's a bit discombobulating. I remember when I first started using IEMs, that was certainly the case. And so there can be some value in practicing that mode as well. And essentially, for those of you who don't know, IEMs, in-ear monitoring, is literally all you're doing is taking the floor monitor and putting it into a little earbud and putting it inside your ear. They're typically, do I say a better tech, let's just say a different tech to, just your earbuds or those sorts of things. So, Kelly, I hope that helps. Will you hear yourself more accurately with headphones on? Yes. But that depends on the quality of your fold back and those sorts of things. So there is a little bit of sort of horses for courses here, but perhaps something for you to play around with. It does, in one sense, it does come back to this idea of there's no absolute right or wrong, but it can be of value to follow the path that I just described, as far as the technical versus the song working out, and then perhaps practicing with the IEMs. We've got a question here from a name I've not seen before. Oh, come on, where are you? There's a lot of comments. There's a lot of comments. And I'm trying to search through them, and I'm trying to make sure that I don't... No, it's a weird one, this one. This different program that I'm using is quite unusual. Let me just come back and find. I'm going to take... Oh, okay. So it puts you up. That's weird to me. Okay, let me just find out. We've got a question here from Gain Detergent. The question is elements. Here we go. So this is a question from Gain Detergents, and Gain Detergents is saying, how do vocal Gain Detergent? Is that a thing? Like, is Gain Detergent actually a thing? It's not something that I think I've ever seen in Australia. How do vocal elements like vowels, twang, and pitch accuracy bring about overtones? Wow, fascinating question. Which of these elements do you think make overtones more apparent? Thank you very much for the info you put out. You're more than welcome, Gain. A good way to... So every vowel has overtones. We as human beings, we create complex sound. That is, if I sing this note, yeah, that we're hearing what's referred to as the fundamental pitch, the pitch that you heard and you would recognize as being the note. But then there are overtones, and they are sitting in mathematical layers and frequencies above that fundamental pitch. The reason we hear the note as ya is because the fundamental pitch, the fundamental frequency, is the loudest in that overtone series. And then what determines what vowel it is how the different overtones present in that series. So when we get to something like twang, so twang actually takes the overtones that sit somewhere between. It'll depend on the vowel, the vowel, and also where you're sitting. It'll be somewhere between 2.8 to 3.2 kilohertz. We'll get this boost of volume in that frequency range on that vowel and on that note. And that's what twang is. Twang is simply a volume boost, an EQ boost in that frequency range. The way we create that is through the shaping of the laryngopharyngeal space and just immediately above the vocal folds, and it gives us that lift of sound. And so when you say which of these elements do you think make overtones more apparent, I understand what you're asking, but and certainly twang could be said to really activate a very intentional space within that overtone series. But actually every vowel is doing its own shaping, and so to say which one's more important, well, they're all important, because you need to be able to create all the vowel sounds to be understood. And so I wouldn't go saying anything's more important. However, one of the reasons why we really talk a lot about twang here at Voice Essentials and we learn the skills around it is because, actually not because of the apparent clear focused resonance that we garner from twang, but more importantly, it's because of the efficiency that it is able to be produced with. And efficiency, particularly for working singers, is premium. It is the number one thing that we need to develop for a professional singer. We need the voice to be efficient, because otherwise we're working too hard. We're going to hit fatigue points way too early. When the voice is singing under fatigue, then it wears and tears, and that can lead to damage. So efficiency is premium for the working singer. And so, yes, twang does give us that, clarity of sound, but it's the clarity that gives us the efficiency, and also the reduction of air pressure that twang is needed for. So which of these elements makes the overtones more apparent? All of them. You can see my struggle with the way the question's worded. It leads me to go to say that twang is more important than anything, but of course to shape any different vowel, you need to have a different, movement of the overtones. So anyway, Anne has asked a question. Gain detergent. I do find myself laughing at some of the handles sometimes. Gain, I hope that was helpful for you. Anne is asking, what is the best way to develop a strong middle voice? And this is interesting, isn't it? Because that actually harkens right back to the very first question we asked, and that is the question about mixed voice. And so here we go. I think, I'll be bold enough to say, I think what we're hearing here is another term used for the very same thing. Mixed voice, middle voice. To develop a strong middle voice, to develop a strong mixed voice, I'm a great believer in you need to develop your entire range. And in working specifically on set registers, low, upper, falsetto for men, flute for women, and if you have access to it, whistle tone, but that's more a vocal effect region that you can play with. But as far as the weighting of the musculature go, I think we can just go with lower, upper, and falsetto for men, flute for women. Then what you need to do is workshop each of those separate areas and then start working your ability to move across your range, moving between registers. So we start having to work through your registrational transitions. As you start to balance out those register transitions, you start to really experience the weighting difference. That there is a difference in, you know, how heavy the voice is, how light the voice is. Oh, and there's a bit of a middle space there. Okay, so once you find that middle space, then you can start to, you know, workshop it. So when we talk about developing a strong middle voice, actually what we're talking about is developing better coordination of the musculature. But the only way that can have strength is if you've really developed each register separately to then coordinate those strong separate registrations, if that makes sense. And so that would be what I'd be encouraging you to do, Anne, is to really make sure you're working each register, really developing the muscular strength for that specific register, then learn to coordinate between the two. Because it's actually middle voice, mixed voice is more about your ability to coordinate the musculature and the weighting of that musculature. Justin has a question here. If I can find it. Justin is asking, we're having a lot of questions today about registers. How do I sing higher? Well, Justin, I think what we need to do is, and as a contemporary singing teacher, I always develop, first and foremost, I always have my students develop lower register first, because it forms the foundation of the vast majority of contemporary, you know, music, rock, pop, country, you know, indie folk to a certain extent, but though it could be argued that the predominant weighting of indie folk is actually a mix sound. So as far as then developing the voice higher, what we then start doing is we start with exercises, and in Voice Essentials we do work with exercises designed to take the voice higher. This can be particularly for female voices. This can be a bit scary because a lot of women will avoid their upper register, and we'll find it very a bit scary to go up there because it can be very light, it can be very lack confidence and feel just a bit uncertain and unsure of itself up in the top ranges of the voice. Interestingly, for guys, will often go from their lower register and just take the lower register as high as it can go, and then they automatically flip into falsetto with almost nothing in between upper register. That's like almost the upper register doesn't exist. And so it is really important that we, you know, first of all, build that solid foundation of voice, and then we start accessing it. And a big part of the commencement of that is the play. You know, we and I want to get Heidi Moss back on later in the year, because I want to talk more about her. She really has a very, you know, academic way of talking about this. We don't talk enough about playing with the voice, and I think that's sort of leftovers from our sort of modernist 20th century, where we were told only do this, and this is by our teachers, and stay in this lane, don't go looking for anything else. This is exactly how the voice is to behave. Whereas I think in the postmodern era, I think we can afford to play a bit more and enjoy the experimentation, the exploration of our voice. That comes with a very sensible caution to be smart about the way you use the voice in that exploration. Doing really silly things like I still remember seeing a video here on YouTube. Oh, it would have to be a decade ago, maybe probably longer. And it was this fellow teaching hard rock, well, what he deemed was hard rock, and it had him standing in front of a wall. So there's the wall, and there's his head, and he's screaming at the wall. And this was how he was encouraging the development of hard rock voice. Oh, I think we all, I think I'm preaching to the choir here at Voice Essentials when I say don't do that. And so we do have to be sensible in our play, and do things that are healthy for the voice. But equally, you can take some very mindful and intelligent risks and explore what your voice will do. And so part of developing your higher range, Justin, is to start taking the voice up into the upper regions of your anatomical limits. And that's really important. Your anatomical limits are going to be different to mine, are going to be different to Anne's, are going to be different to Kelly's. Everyone has different anatomical limits, and you have to explore your anatomical limits, not someone else's. So just because someone jumps online and says, listen to how high I can go, we listened to a Dimash video where his highest recorded note, I think last time I checked, was D8. Well, that's great for Dimash. For the rest of us, that is, if you tried to, well, you couldn't. I can't hit a D8. And I would do myself a serious disservice in trying. So it's you exploring your anatomical limits, but doing that in a playful way. Oh, we've got a question from Linda, who I think we're going to want to have a listen to. Oh, okay. Linda's got a second question here. We're going to ask. I'm going to put it up here. I think it's from Anne again. She had a second question. What is the best way to develop a seamless range transition from chest to head voice, especially? And we typically do that to start with. I use SOVT, semi-occluded vocal tract activities. Lip bubbles is a good one. Straw phonation could be helpful. Tongue trills, and we can use and that balances what's called the impedance of the vocal tract on acoustical level, but also assists the mechanical operation of your larynx to assist the movement, the free movement through your register transitions. In Voice Essentials, we start working on this at the end of Voice Essentials 1, and we do some more work on it at the very beginning of Voice Essentials 2 with vocal sirens. And it all comes down to balance and the way you're able to coordinate that musculature in accordance with the resonance, the acoustic value of the sounds that you're creating, whether it be lip bubble, tongue trill, straw phonations, those sorts of things. And so I hope that's helpful. Oh, Mackenzie, Kate has just jumped in and asked a question, which Mackenzie asking a question is not a surprise, but the fact that Mackenzie is the sixth question and not the first, that is a surprise. So Mackenzie, it's good to see you jumping in here and asking your question. And Mackenzie's question sort of, I think, follows on from the question we just answered. You know, how do I fix register imbalance in my lower range? Well, that's about all of the stuff that we've been talking about today, Mackenzie. And so I would encourage you to go back and have a little bit of a listen earlier on. But you've then got a follow-up question where you asked, how do I fix a muscular register imbalance in my lower register? Oh, that's the same question. Just worded a little differently. How do you fix a muscular register imbalance? It really comes down to the coordination and how much air is being applied into that activation. A big part of vocal fold weight is driven by the amount of subglottal pressure. If you have really high levels of subglottal pressure, you're going to find the vocal tract, the vocal folds wanting to bear down and hold that pressure back because it's leaning the voice, the larynx, towards a valving function, which we want to be really, probably avoid that valving function for the most part, unless you're going for a pressed vocal quality. And this is the skill, right? It's maintaining low phonatory threshold pressure while you also maintain a really nice level, a consistent phonatory threshold flow. And that's the challenge that faces us every time we step up to sing. This singing thing, it's not easy to do, is it? But I think that's what keeps us coming back. It's such a wonderful challenge to get it right, and with it always thinking it moves about, and anyway, depending on how much sleep you had and all that sort of stuff. Really great questions today, everyone. We're going to call it a day there because I can feel my voice just getting a little bit tired because we've just gone hammer and tong today, which has been fantastic. So thank you so much for joining in, and please hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed today's live hangout. Just to remind you once again, let me just come back over to here so we can. So just a reminder that next week we're going to be coming in for a mini topic. We're going to be talking about how to develop your unique voice. That's going to be a really beneficial session. So make sure you jump in next Monday at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Check your local guides. And then 2 weeks we'll have my good friend Sharon Tree joining us and to talk about busting the myths around singing, of which there are many. So I'm looking forward to hanging out with you. Today's hangout went really quick. I don't know how, but it did. Did it go quick for you? It feels like it went really quickly. I've enjoyed hanging out with you all. I hope you have a great week. Again, happy Mother's Day to those of you in the UK. I think those in the US and Canada, you've still got a few moments to celebrate National Napping Day. Is that what it was called, Linda? And Linda can now go and enjoy the rest of her 8 hours Labor Day. My Labor Day here in Queensland isn't until May, the first Monday of May, which, for those of you who do want to know, we won't be having a live hangout on that day because it'll be a public holiday. Anyway, I'll remind you when we get closer. I look forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.